this afternoon. I'm happy to say that this afternoon at the Alliance for Change press conference, we have with us Member of Parliament and founding member of the Alliance for Change, Mr. Kemraj Ramjathan, and also to my extreme left, leader of the Alliance for Change, attorney at law, Nigel Hughes. I'm going to invite Mr. Ramjathan to start with his presentation on the current situation at Gaisuco.
Thank you very much, Kathy. I want to commence my short address on this issue of Gaisuco by stating that, again, it seems that the PPP wants to spend a massive set of money, and probably for electoral purposes too, on a sector that has gone down the drain in the most, what you can call the worst of its history, and wanting to spend and run the country down just to keep Gaisuco going. We have made very many statements on this sugar industry. We have done so whilst being in government, APNU AFC, in 2016. We had gotten a commission's report out. We had gotten a green paper. We had also gotten an expert, Errol Hanneman, who had taken over Gaisuco and had indicated the huge problems that it was suffering. And he had made it quite clear that right sizing was the way to go forward with that sugar industry, so that at some point in time we can make it profitable. Namely, merging of estates, but also the what you call phasing away of certain factories, and we had identified those. Because what was needed was good support for the factories that could have made it, with the estates having the sugar supplying them, so that at least the sector could be in survival mode. We spent over $42 billion during a 5-year period, and it would appear that the government is going to spend even more than that in this sector, because of course we had decided that money spent there is literally going down a black hole. I want to indicate that, as we have said before, there are reasons why this industry was run down. And it was long before the APNU AFC came into government that caused this. Monies from EU, European Union, over 100 million US dollars, were never directed to rehabilitate factories and to do back construction work and drainage and irrigation in these estates. A younger generation do not want to get into that industry. The nature of the job, its back-breaking character, is what is keeping especially the youths from Albion and Portmorant and Wales and wheresoever else, IFLOT, they have all literally abandoned. And the mechanization on those soil types and the terrain there in some of these estates will make it almost impossible. Rains fall, get soggy in that clay, and so it is very, very difficult. Then the capital investment needed for what is called for all the deteriorating structures that are there will be too massive. But most of all would be the price in the world market for sugar. We will continually, even with all, if we solve the problem of capital investment, we'll still have a price in the world market that will be lower than our cost of production. And to that extent, it is quite clear that the country will not have a good future with sugar. We had indicated too that changing CEOs cannot fix the sugar problem. That was, I think, the last statement I made. Because, of course, these CEOs that they take are just political loyalists. Take, for example, Seth Narayan Singh. He did so badly in it, but he got promotions and he went to Brussels as our chief ambassador there. And then they brought in a political loyalist, Paul Chung. And he now has humongous problems dealing with this sugar industry. And I understand is asking them, what trouble will you put me inside? And all, of course, because of some of the worst investments, one being since probably the worst since probably independence, the Skeldon Sugar Factory. So now to hear that they have massive ambitious plans for the sugar sector is nothing but political gimmicks in an electoral silly season to fool and do the poppycock and propaganda, whatever they want to tell their support base in the sugar estates. It's all poppycock. It's all hollow propaganda. And so I am urging that there seems, unless, of course, there is continuously the right sizing and spending of the monies into those factories that could work, like we started, this sugar industry would not have a future. And I am urging the support base of the PPP to understand that the PPP is only out here to deceive and fool you in relation to whatever they're now calling an ambitious plan to revitalize Gaisuco. Don't be fooled. It's election time. We all know it's silly season, but simply don't be deceived. Thank you very much.
Thank you very much, Comrade Ramjatan. And now, Mr. Nigel Hughes with his presentation on current legal issues.
Good afternoon, members of the press, and thank you so much for coming. I want to start this afternoon dealing with the legislative agenda of an AFC administration after September the 1st, 2025. I want to start with perhaps the most important aspect that affects the independence of the judiciary and the deadlock that we have had for the last 20 years in relation to the appointment of the Chancellor and the Chief Justice. An AFC administration will introduce legislation that says that in the event of a deadlock between the President and the Leader of the Opposition in relation to the permanent appointment of the Chancellor and the Chief Justice, that in such a deadlock, the Regional Judicial and Legal Services Commission be clothed with the authority to receive the nominations of both the President and the Leader of the Opposition and make a final determination in relation to those two positions. That's one piece of legislation that we will introduce. Two, we will introduce within the first 3 months legislation that will say that coalitions are possible after the elections. Three, we will immediately bring into force the Human Rights Commission with all the regulations, a fully staffed and funded secretariat with research capabilities and all that is necessary to allow it to operate. We will set up a civilian oversight commission which will be charged with the responsibility of reviewing police actions. They will have the power of investigation, the power to prosecute, and the power to enforce any decisions that come as a result of court proceedings. We will introduce legislation to remove the savings law clause in the Constitution. And if I could just briefly explain what that is to non-lawyers. In the Constitution, there is a clause that says all laws that were valid and in existence prior to the establishment of the Constitution remain valid despite the fact that the Constitution gives you protected constitutional rights, which those old laws may be in violation of. So, for example, vagrancy laws. Vagrancy laws might offend the provisions of your guaranteed protected rights, but they have to remain on the statute because of the savings law clause. So a lot of the archaic old laws that were used for various reasons in a different time have to remain on our statute books, like, for example, blasphemous libel. So we are going to introduce legislation that says we will remove the savings law clauses, which means that all laws can now be challenged to see whether or not they meet the level of qualification for constitutional protection. We will also introduce legislation that says no person shall pass through the criminal justice system charged with an indictable offense without legal aid. We cannot continue to have people going to court because they cannot afford legal representation, charged with serious offenses. And so we will establish a fully funded legal aid department, which will ensure that any person who is charged with an indictable offense from the magistrate's courts level is provided with legal advice, because too many young people are slipping through the cracks because of an absence of adequate legal representation. We will establish digital laws that will allow the digitization of all the registries in this country, particularly the deeds registry, the commercial registry, and also the land registry. And it will allow persons to search online from any part of the world the records that are kept in those respective registries. This, we believe, will lead to the digitization of our property register and make us more attractive and competitively globally. We will implement, as a matter of urgency, all contemporary laws that are needed to protect the intellectual property rights of persons who are creative. That includes copyright. We will update the trademark law, the design law, the patents law, so that we are up to date with the best international protection afforded to copyright. We will establish we will establish and introduce legislation for cash transfers. So any transfer of money from the state, whether from the Natural Resources Fund or otherwise, will have a legislative framework, and that framework will provide grievance procedures for people who are affected adversely by the distribution of those cash transfers. So, for example, if in the distribution of cash transfers someone doesn't like you, or the person's responsible for distributing the cash transfer does not like you, there will be procedures set up in the legislation for you to actually make a complaint, for that complaint to be dealt with expeditiously, and for you to be provided with a decision about your entitlement to the cash grant. We will also make sure that we introduce legislation that deals with the expansion of the fundamental protection, fundamental guaranteed protective rights that exist in the Constitution, and that those articles of the Constitution which are non-justiciable, like, for example, Article 13, which provides for the participation in the decision-making processes of the state, we will make that a protected, guaranteed right, in which case anybody or any organization, if, for example, an RDC or an NDC or the City Council believes that they have been affected and they have not been heard before the passage of legislation that affects the entire state, they will be able to bring proceedings as a body under Article 13. So we will move it from where it is and make it a guaranteed protected right. And that is just part of the legislative agenda. We will also, and this is a question of operationalizing as opposed to passing legislation, the whistleblower legislation. We will immediately operationalize the whistleblowing legislation, which will allow whistleblowers to make reports to the police, but we will enhance it by providing funds and resources for the protection of whistleblowers so that they can be taken out of the country and kept in a safe location pending the trial and pending their testimony, and also for their protection after the conduct of a trial, whether or not it results in a conviction or not. We think that is extremely important. We will also, as a matter of urgency, invite all parties to make sure to pass legislation that the recommendations that were made in the 2001 to 2003 constitutional reform process, that those recommendations are immediately reviewed and within 9 months to a year, they are implemented. This would not affect the work that is going on now by the present Constitutional Commission, but what it does do is bring us up to date in relation to all those recommendations that were made over 22 years ago by the Commission, and make sure that we can actually enhance the protections under our Constitution. And that is what our legislative agenda will look like. And I hasten to add that this is just part of it. I do want to conclude by reading a statement on behalf of the Alliance for Change on the weaponization of the law, entitled "A Dangerous Slide Away from Democracy." The Alliance for Change is deeply alarmed by the increasing pattern of politically motivated prosecutions and legal overreach under the current administration. What we are witnessing is the quiet dismantling of the guardrails that protect Guyana's democracy and constitutional freedoms. Recent legal actions against prominent Guyanese, including businessman Azzuddin Mohammed, political activist Rickford Burke, and social commentator Daniel Wharton, aka Baby Skello, reveal a disturbing trend. In Mohammed's case, the tax-related charges were filed years after the matter was deemed resolved and triggered questions about motive. Burke was charged under an outdated defamation law, which has been declared unconstitutional, and a legally questionable attempt was made to serve him with a summons outside the national jurisdiction. The bigger picture, a pattern of political targeting. Many believe that the reopening of the Ricardo Fagundes, that's the Paper Shorts murder investigation, is not in the genuine pursuit of justice, but a politically timed effort to undermine Mohammed's rise as a political contender. Whether true or not, the optics are deeply concerning. In a democracy, even the appearance of prosecutorial bias erodes trust. These actions are not isolated. They are part of a broader erosion of the institutional independence. When police and prosecutors are used as instruments of political retribution, every Guyanese, regardless of political affiliation, has reason to be concerned. In a society already burdened by economic inequality, the misuse of state power only deepens cynicism. Permit me to close this afternoon's formal statement by expressing the profound sympathies of the Alliance for Change to the family of Senior Counsel Mercelin Bacchus and to the family of recently deceased Mr. Justice Ramlal Retired, who was former Commissioner of the Police Complaints Authority. We thank both of these gentlemen for their outstanding service to the Republic of Guyana. We offer our condolences to the members of their family, and we thank them for having shared their time with us. Thank you.
Thank you very much to my representatives of the Alliance for Change with us this afternoon. And at this point in time, I would like to invite members of the media to pose their questions to any of our presenters. Please use raise hand function, and of course identify yourself and the organization from which you come. Thank you. Adam Harris, please go ahead.
Yeah. Good afternoon, everybody. I joined late, and I heard Mr. Ramjatan talking about sugar and its woes. Now, the man who headed sugar, you said, was a failure, but sugar itself was a talking point of the political campaign in 2020, when they accused the coalition of closing down sugar estates. And the government had pledged to reopen some of the sugar estates. Sir, how many sugar estates have been reopened? And what has been the consequence or the production of these sugar estates?
Well, after the right sizing of sugar, Adam, I do not think that there was the reopening of Skeldon factory, nor Wales factory. There was something happening at Kanji, and a rehabilitation that went on there. But apart from that, I don't think the promise that they wanted to keep, namely Skeldon will be reopened and Wales will be reopened, that those were ever reopened. The consequences of their experiment with it again was the wastage of, I think, about $40 billion since they got back into government. And a payment of loans that were taken a long time ago of almost, if I do have the amount here, billions of dollars that they have to pay per annum for a loan that we had taken to make sure that, because we didn't have oil monies at the time, but also monies from the treasury itself, which could have gone to so many other things. I don't have the figures right offhand, but I think it is in the vicinity of about $5 billion per annum that we have to pay back the banks for that special arrangement that was made. All because we wanted to give it a shot and to pay back for so many things that the then Gaisuco, when we got in there in 2015, demanded that if you want the operations to continue, and even for what is called payments like severance payments and so on, all accumulated on us, and we had to go take that loan, as happened in 2016. So that is what has happened. It has just worsened. And what has happened is that the targets have diminished from, you know, the big 250,000 tons, even more than that, 300,000 tons, on to literally 90,000 tons now. And I don't think that they're reaching their targets of 90,000 tons.
30,000, I think it is.
Exactly, per annum. This year, I don't know where it will go. I don't think they'll even reach 75,000 tons. But it's a lot of mouthings and utterances and poppycock, as I said, and propaganda, to the extent whereby they now have ambitious plans. After 5 years, ambitious plans, it's just, and I'm urging the PPP support base that are largely the employees here not to be fooled again. So, you know, this is one good reason why you shouldn't vote for them this elections. I know that these are support bases of the PPP in the sugar industry, in the sugar sector, in the various parts of the geography of Guyana. But please, this is one reason why they shouldn't be voted for. And I am urging that the PPP supporters who know that they have done so badly, stay home rather than go and vote for the PPP. If you don't want to vote for any other party, stay home. It will be a wise decision that you will be making, knowing how they have literally done a debacle in relation to this sugar sector.
Thank you,
Excuse me,
Cameron.
that brings me to the question then. Given what appears to be the wasteful expenditure on Gaisuco, how are you using that in your campaign for this election, especially in the sugar areas?
Well, we have been speaking through the medium that we have, or AFC Berbice on the Move, and we are talking to them about what we had, namely the right sizing. Don't spend money wildly on reopening any new factories or wildly going and do work on estates that were closed. We are talking about alternative livelihoods in which the same land that were there would be given to farmers for what we had called the 4 Ps project. Prawns, peppers, pumpkins, and what was the other one? Pumpkins, I think it was. Because these, when we had done our analysis, these are specialized crops that can make far more, with an intensive agricultural method, far more money than sugar. And you have to train the people. Prawns was the most profitable of them all. But we are not training in that alternative livelihoods program how you're going to do the prawns, how you're going to get the spawns, how you go, what the feeding of them and all of that. And then, you know, until maturity, and then selling it overseas and so on. This is what we got to do. We just can't make cane cutters out of the Guyanese PPP base. You got to move on. And that is what we were talking about. Peppers is another thing. I know of certain manufacturers that are buying the peppers very costly right now in Guyana because a lot of people don't plant it. But it could be a very big industry. And it is important that we reopen other industries rather than have this thing. So that is what we got to talk about, alternative livelihoods, and then, of course, not wasting the money into the same estates, knowing very well it is a black hole.
One more question. That being the case, yes, you've been talking to the people by way of the media, but on the ground, are you in contact with the sugar workers to let them understand the reality, sir?
Well, the public meetings, quite frankly, haven't started, but I was up Berbice last Wednesday. Of course, as you know, I was going there on several occasions for the sugar workers, 21 of them who were charged. We managed to get them off. So we've been constantly in contact with them. And whenever we go up, we talk to our base support within these industries. But quite frankly, yes, indeed, we haven't gotten down to the ground in the meetings at the street corners, at Albion, and whatever. But that, I'm certain, will be done. And I will be going up Berbice. I've put aside a 6-7 weeks period for that purposes. And so that we will start talking to them about that, and West Demerara.
Thank you, Kemraj. Any other questions from members of the media? Either those represented here at the Alliance for Change building or, of course, online.
Mr. Hughes, then Shabal Demerara, sir.
Good
As a
afternoon.
lawyer, can you say what law governs the use of symbols, and do you consider the various components, if I can call them that, of the coat of arms as national symbols?
Two things. I'm assuming that when you ask me what law governs national symbols, you're not talking about intellectual property protection. You're talking about in the context of political symbolism. Is that correct?
Yeah, political symbolism, probably commercial use.
Yeah, I was going to say
probably
okay.
other types of artistic use. Generally.
Sure. For geographic use, for example, commercial use, there is the Geographic Indicators Act, which deals with items that are specifically identifiable with a particular part of the world. The obvious example is champagne, could only come from Champagne, France. The rest is bubbling wine. In the case of, I suspect what you want to get to is the jaguar. The jaguar is an animal that is not peculiar to Guyana alone. It's throughout the South American continent. And the fact that the jaguar might form part of some sort of national symbol does not prohibit, as far as I'm aware, its use either as a symbol in Guyana or elsewhere. So Guyana, for example, can't claim the jaguar exclusively because Brazil equally, there are jaguars in Brazil, there are jaguars in the rainforest in Venezuela,
Ecuador, no?
there Ecuador. So the jaguar is in the entire South American continent, I think. So this suggestion that somehow or the other it is national and therefore as a result of that being it's exclusive, I think is a fallacy. It could be national, but it doesn't mean that it can't be used. That's the first point. And in relation to any specific domestic legislation that affects it, I am unaware of it at the moment. I don't remember what your second question was.
But domestically, do you consider the various components of the coat of arms national symbols? For instance, the Victoria Regia Lily.
Of course, they're national symbols, but I think, and I don't want to assume, but I think the question you're asking is whether because it's a national symbol it can be used, and that I don't believe is the case. The Ghana flag is a national symbol. It doesn't mean that you can't run around the place using the Ghana flag, but you probably couldn't use it as a political party, so it depends on the context.
Do you believe that Jaguar can be used for a political party?
Of course. Of course, there are parties that have the elephant in India as a symbol. There are parties that have various animals in different parts of the world as their party symbol. And of course,
Well, I'm saying that Jaguar as being part of the coat of arms. Do you believe it can be used?
Ravi, they've used it, I think. In this.
you mean if it can be used what? As a symbol of a political party or as part of the coat of arms?
Yeah.
Of course it can be used as a symbol of a political party. Of course it can.
And there's no law prohibiting that.
Not that I'm aware of. I don't pretend to be
No prohibition.
knowledgeable of all the laws, but I'm unaware of a law that prohibits it. If you want to use the kanji pheasant and call your party the Pheasant Party, I'm sure you can do that.
I have a question, sir, and it has to do with education. Now, the NGSA results came out. I didn't hear you talk about the education, but according to the education minister, there was a fantastic improvement in the pass rate for maths. It jumped from 49%, I think she said, to 63%. And I remember at the press conference some time back, you talked about the decline in education standards. How is this possible? Is she trying to make you a liar?
Two things. I don't think her intention was to make me a liar. I was talking about what the previous results are. But I have to say this, and I'm saying this as cautiously as I can. The results or the percentages that they have attributed to improvement in a single year seem unbelievable, especially where there was no new program introduced into the educational sector that might have led to that sort of performance. Normally, in any industry, if you get a performance improvement of, let's say, anything over 3-4% over the year, it is always as a result of some new introduction into the manufacturing process, some new phenomenon that would justify that sort of magical increase. You're downsizing, you probably make your system different, you have new equipment, and that applies across the board. You don't see that kind of dramatic improvement. Now, education, unlike the commercial world, takes a lot longer. So, for example, children going to school, it takes 5 years for you to matriculate. So the periods are longer. So to see that kind of drastic increase means that one has to examine the basis upon which that announcement has been made. I am not for a second casting any aspersions as yet, but what I am saying is if the minister can disclose the base data upon which this information is premised. So, for example, we would want data as to, okay, where are the areas in which maths improved? If maths improved across the entire country, it means there was some introduction of some new program across the entire country that allowed that sort of jump in mathematics. If maths improved, for example, on the west coast of Demerara, a pocket, you saw a significant increase there. It could be a result of many things. They might have introduced a new program, a new teaching method. So we need the base data, because the last thing we want in education is we don't want the people to yield to the temptation of giving us information that is not based on reliable data. You may recall when I first was privileged enough to be in this position in the Alliance for Change, I did say that education was one of the areas which you should take out of the political discourse and have a 10 to 15-year plan that is agreed by all the parties. Because there will always be the temptation for whoever is in office to attempt to politicize the results. And we need to make sure that the data as presented is reliable. So I would only ask the minister to avoid any speculation as to whether or not her percentages are accurate, that they release the base data on that. And if they're going to do that, perhaps they can identify what it was that occurred in the last year that had not been happening before that would have led to that sort of dramatic improvement. But I commend the teachers across the country if, as the minister has said, this is actually so.
Thank
And
you.
oh, sorry.
So, go ahead.
And while you're at it, sir, the government has announced pay increase, and this is coming just before the elections. Your reaction?
Adam, I hope when all of us go to the polls on September the 1st, we ask ourselves a couple of very basic, simple questions. The commercial production of oil started since 19th of December 2019, sorry. We started producing 600,000 plus barrels since 2023. Why is it in the last 6 months, all of a sudden, everything is suddenly being done? If you have had access to this sort of revenue for the last 5 years, you should be running on your record, not in your promises. You should be running on your record of what you've done. Now, the 8% comes literally, 2 months away from the election? And the other important thing about the 8%, it's 8% taxable, so people are not actually going to get an 8% increase in their salary. That 8% becomes taxable. And if, for example, you are above the minimum wage, that sum goes into your salary and it gets taxed. So you probably will end up at 5% or less. If you are below the minimum wage, which quite a few people are, you will not get that because you won't get the increase. So I think it is clearly politically motivated, but I think we all as citizens have to ask, why is it that we're getting promises close to the election when we had the ability to deliver on all of these promises since 2020 because we've had the financial resources?
Mr. Hughes, given the fact that there clearly is a decision by both the APNU and the AFC to contest the election separately, to what extent do you believe that it is risky on the part of the AFC to do so because of the likelihood that it can actually the figures coming out of the elections can actually throw up your actual support strength on the ground, and the likely impact this can have in any future relations or negotiations with the APNU?
I think every political party wants to know what its strength is on the ground. So I'm not sure that is a basis for not going into an election. And as you know, there are parties that go into elections, they don't get what they think they would get, and there are some parties that go into elections that get infinitely more than they thought they would get. But I don't think the fact that you run a risk means that you wouldn't enter into a competition. The fact that you're a political party means that you are in the business of providing political options to the citizens, and the citizens get an opportunity to vote on whatever it is you do represent, both your policies, the persons that you have up as candidates, and the reputation of the party.
Wouldn't you have been better off not participating, so that you of course your real support may, if it is low, is not shown, and therefore you stand a better chance of leveraging that which is not known in any future negotiations with APNU?
Sorry, Dennis, are you suggesting that we don't participate because we would have greater leverage in the future by saying, if we did participate, we might have done X, Y, and Z? Is that the suggestion?
Well, it's not a suggestion, it's a question.
Oh, that's the question. No, I think the reason why we have elections is that we go and we see what the strength is. I mean, and certainly if our performance is not what people think it would be, or whether the party is disappointed in the results, then there are consequences to it. I don't think we can not go simply because there's some speculation as to how we would do.
And as a man who believes in data, has long touted the importance of data, or what is your data showing as far as your likely performance at the polls will be?
Our data is encouraging.
Encouraging is qualitative, not quantitative. What is the quantitative assessment?
Well, I'm not going to disclose what our polls have been showing. Like I said, it's encouraging.
Thank you.
Sure.
Thank you very much. Are there any other questions?
Yes, I want to ask whether there internally in the AFC was any last-ditch effort to see whether there should be any sort of engagement with the APNU, even though the date has passed for the submission of the symbols.
Well, I think, Dennis, you're an exceedingly experienced journalist. You know that the submission of the symbols is a requirement from GCOM, and I believe I heard you ask the question during the press conference, which Mr. Norton attended a few hours ago, about the symbols, and I think he indicated that no symbol has been submitted for the APNU AFC. So as things stand legally, all the parties who have submitted symbols are contesting individually.
Will the AFC be willing to make available? Well, will the AFC be willing to have any of its members be selected by, say, a North-led administration, or even if the APNU goes back into opposition, to say, well, you will be part of the APNU's either cabinet or a group of parliamentarians, but mindful of the fact that their symbols have been submitted. For instance, if Mr. Norton is head of the government, and he says, well, Mr. Hughes, I would like you to send a few names for me to consider to sit in the cabinet, to be members of the cabinet or ministers, would that be something that the AFC be willing to consider?
The AFC has always, before me, and I suspect after me, been committed to the development of Guyana and making sure it has its best citizens available to assist in that process. If, as a matter of eventuality, Mr. Norton becomes the president and he is of the view whether individually or the Alliance for Change as a party could participate in a government post-elections, the Alliance for Change is certainly going to consider that. And we certainly would not stand in the way of any member if invited by Mr. Norton to be part of his government. We are a Liberal Democratic Party. So I hope that answers your question.
Okay.
Excellent.
Thank you very much. Are there any other questions? If not, I do want to say a special congratulations once again to our students and also to the teachers and parents who all worked so hard to have success in the recent grade 6 assessment, the NGSA exam. So with that, I think I'm getting another request right here.
I do want to say to the students, and I want to say this particularly to the students that may not have done as well as they thought they would do, or might have been a mark short of where they wanted to go. You've done well, you've done extremely well. Unfortunately, we have a system which is competitive in nature, and this does not determine the rest of your life. It probably doesn't even determine what happens to you in the next year. We appreciate all the people who have sat the secondary exams. We appreciate that everybody who sat did their best, or certainly tried to do their best. To those parents who might be disappointed in some of the results, I say to you, be encouraged, because in the future, particularly under the AFC administration, all students who sit this NGSA exam will be guaranteed an excellent future, and they will be guaranteed high quality education across the board. So you don't have to get into the top 5% to get the best education. We will be spending those resources on the teachers across the country to make sure that you are not disadvantaged merely because you might not have gotten where you want to go.
Thank you very much once again, and have a safe weekend. Thank you.
Good.